The Rugrats was a show that almost every 90s kid grew up with, and even though most of the episodes had a rather fun tone to them, it also had some pretty dark episodes that, oddly enough, were mostly centered around Chuckie. Like, I don't know if you remember the Season 3 episode, Chuckie's Wonderful Life, where Chuckie saw what the world would be like without him in it. The episode was so morbid that some fans have even speculated that Chuckie might have died. Now, how does a seemingly lighthearted show like the Rugrats present such a dark tone? Well, in the episode, like many before it, everything can be traced back to Angelica and her scheming, only in this case, it led to Chuckie lashing out in a way that was very out of character for him. Chuckie's Wonderful Life started out with all of the babies playing in the playpen over at Chuckie's house, only instead of having an adventure like they usually have, Tommy, Chuckie, Phil, and Lil were admiring a CD standing up on a table nearby. It wasn't just any CD though, it happened to be Chaz's favorite Latvian folk music CD. The babies were all entranced by how shiny and round the CD was, and Phil quickly suggested that they should all go and play with it. Chuckie, being the smart and cautious one, as usual, said that he didn't think it was a good idea because of how important it was to his dad. But Tommy countered with the winning argument, "Look at how shiny it is." And this kid should be a lawyer, I swear. Chuckie agreed that it was shiny, and the babies enthusiastically put their sticky little fingers all over that shiny CD. The episode took a quick turn when the babies noticed Angelica walking over to them. Chuckie did his best to hide the CD, but Angelica saw what he was up to and quickly distracted them so that she could see what treasures they were hoarding. Well, she must have been caught up in its shininess too, because that little thief snatched the CD and left. Chuckie was immediately concerned, and then when Chaz walked in and started looking for the CD, things only got worse. With nowhere to place his anger, Chuckie turned to his friends, who convinced him to move his daddy's favorite toy, and lashed out at them. He yelled at Tommy, Phil, and Lil for making them do something that he didn't want to do. This caused Tommy to suggest that they all leave Chuckie alone for a while because he was clearly angry. Now, I know what you're wondering. Could a lost CD really be that bad? Well, in a way, it led to the death of Chuckie, so I'd say that it did make for a pretty morbid plotline. Now, I definitely want to mention that at no point in the episode do they say that Chuckie died, but once you see the theme in the episode, you might be able to see why some fans have theorized that he was actually dead. You see, the episode continued after the babies left with Angelica approaching Chuckie. Instead of apologizing to him for being so mean, she hammered in the idea that the world would be a better place without Chuckie in it. What a horrible devil of a child. The episode continues by showing Chuckie in his room that night, pacing back and forth. He couldn't stop thinking about what Angelica had said to him, and because he was starting to believe that he didn't belong in the world, he packed up some of his favorite toys and ran away. That's right, Chuckie hit the open road with nothing but a couple of blocks and some stuffies. Now, this is where things take a dark turn in the episode because they use Chuckie to play out the premise of It's a Wonderful Life. As Chuckie was walking down the road, he approached a bridge and he overheard someone calling out to him. The familiar voice claimed to be his gardening angel, but we all know he meant guardian. Chuckie was skeptical at first, wondering why his guardian hadn't been there to help him in the past when he was in trouble. The pair argue, and Chuckie explains to his angel that the world would be better off without him. At this point in the episode, the angel decides to show Chuckie what life would be like without him. Now, this is where the theory starts to come into play, because they never explain what happened to Chuckie while they show each person's life without him. This has led some fans to speculate that Chuckie would have died if he went ahead with his future. Whether that's true or not though, it was hard to rewatch this episode as an adult and see how horrible the world was without this little kid in it. Now, if you don't remember this episode, you're probably thinking, it couldn't have been that bad, right? You'd be wrong. The lives of Chuckie's friends and family were literally in shambles without him around. I'm not exaggerating either. The first character whose life without Chuckie was shown happened to be his father, Chaz. In a depressing scene, Chaz is shown living a very lonely life. He was living by himself without a wife or child, and it seemed like all he would do all day was sit and talk to Saki, his sock puppet. He and Saki watched C-SPAN together, and overall, it looked like the house had fallen into disarray. Apparently, without Chuckie around to spend time with, look after, and set an example for, Chaz had basically given up. He clearly didn't see a need to clean up or take care of himself mentally. What's really crazy though, is that the sadness didn't stop with Chaz. As Chuckie was chauffeured around the neighborhood by his guardian angel, he noticed the entire town seemed to be a mess, and all of the kids had turned into troublemakers because he wasn't there to tell them not to be bad. The next major stop that they took was to the house of the twins, Phil and Lil. These two were arguably the most chaotic members of their little group, but I would never go as far as to say that they were bad kids. Well, without Chuckie around, it was shown that Phil and Lil would become super unhinged. The episode had them destroying cabinets and throwing plates around their house, all while Howard and Betty were crying and wishing their kids were well behaved. They literally wished that there was a cowardly child who could set a good example for their kids, obviously referring to Chuckie. Apparently, without him around, he could never discourage their wild behavior and they turned into full-time hooligans. If that wasn't sad enough though, the episode continued by showing Chaz at the twins' house. He came over and asked if he and Saki could hang out with Betty and Howard because he needed the company. And when they asked him for parenting advice, all he said was that they should feel lucky that they have kids. Meanwhile, the ghost of Chuckie was standing right there, listening. All the parents started to cry, just like I wanted to when I rewatched it. Eventually, Chuckie's angel brought him to one final house, the house of his best friend, Tommy Pickles. When they arrived though, it was shocking to see Tommy going through the garbage looking for food. That's right, according to Chuckie's guardian angel, one day Angelica came over to the Pickles residence and literally threw Tommy in the trash. She took everything that he had and left with a smile on her face. The only justice to this story is that, for some reason, without Chuckie around, Angelica would supposedly become morbidly obese as she forced Tommy's parents to bake her cookies all day, every day. It's at this point that Chuckie asks the angel why Tommy didn't just stand up for himself like he normally did, and the angel gives a pretty shocking response. According to the angel, Tommy only learned to stand up for himself and be brave because he always had someone watching his back, referring to Chuckie. Without Chuckie around, Tommy wouldn't have had the motivation to stand up to anyone, and Angelica would have just been able to take over. By this point in the episode, I'm left wondering, how long is it going to take Chuckie to realize that he's an important part of everyone's life around him? Thankfully, it didn't take him much longer, and after seeing the horrible situation that everyone was in without him around, he wished for his guardian angel to bring him back home. The angel granted Chuckie's request and brought him back to his room, and the first thing the kid did was look outside. He was thrilled to see that everything seemed peaceful and normal. The episode continued by showing that Tommy, Phil, and Lil all still really cared about Chuckie when the 2-year-old walked into his living room and saw his friends waiting for him. They all apologized to Chuckie after explaining that they had come by earlier but he was napping. Even cooler than that though, each of the babies brought a bunch of their parents' CDs that they stole to try and replace the one that Chaz lost, all because they felt bad for letting their friend down. Chuckie was so happy and touched by his friend's actions, and what's even sweeter is the trouble that Angelica got in almost immediately after Chuckie and his friends made up. After the doorbell rings, Chaz answers the door, only to see Drew and Angelica together. Drew, who was furious, claimed that he found this CD in Angelica's room and noticed that it was Latvian folk dance music. Drew immediately knew that the CD was Chaz's and returned it to him right away. He also forced Angelica to apologize for her actions and then banned her from having dessert for an entire week. Talk about doing hard time. The episode ended with Chuckie, Tommy, Phil, and Lil all being surprised that Angelica had the CD, even though she should have been the prime suspect. But hey, they are babies after all. It's nice that the episode had a happy ending and all, but you can't deny how dark the episode was, especially for a show about babies. Not to mention how hard it was to watch everyone living their lives in shambles if Chuckie wasn't alive. I'm curious though, which of the characters seemed to have the worst life without Chuckie? Was it Chaz and his loneliness, or Tommy and his literal house of garbage? Be sure to let me know what you think in the comments below.